In addition to adult cows, the CNCPS is largely used for replacement, heifers, enterprise. And our goal now is to show how to use efficiently this piece of the platform. Like all other animals, there are some aspects that need to be considered in order to have good answers from the model. And one of the most important aspects is related to the animal characterization. So I am going to spend the next few minutes to describe how to handle properly the animal inputs and how you can input the correct value in order to have current answers. Okay, so one of the first aspects that I would like to mention is that, as you can see, the inputs needed for heifers is apparently more simple than the dairy cows, but the inputs we need are even important because the correct implementation of the input allows us to have good responses. So the first aspect is related to the breed we are working with, exactly like we do for adult animals. And there are the other, in this case I am working with Holstein. There are some other aspects related to the definition of what we call target growth system that I am going to describe a little further. We need to include calving interval for the whole herd, the age at first calving, that is the current age at first calving we are getting right now in our herd, and we need the average, the current average for the group we are feeding. These informations allow us to define the target growth system that you can see in the bottom section of this screen. The target growth system helps us to define the growth curve we need to set in our herd for the different phase of the growth based on the target, on the final target we have for adult cows. The final target is defined in the mature body weight. It is defined here. Let me switch to English because I know you are familiar, you are working with this system. So the mature body weight is one of the most important input we have to set when we define a growing curve. How we can get this mature body weight? Basically, it is a measurement. And let me show you the definition of the mature body weight. And the mature body weight for a single farm can be determined, can be measured on a regular basis, once or twice a year, by measuring a number of cows with some specific characteristics. They have to be in the 3rd or 4th lactation or older, in the middle lactation, around 150 days in milk, with body condition 3 after milking. If we in some way measure this kind of weight, this weight for these cows, the average of these measurements could be taken as mature body weight. Not whole herd have the same mature body weight. So we strongly suggest to have an idea through a measurement about what is the real mature body weight in my herd. You can measure using scales, using tapes, or maybe with some automatic measurements. But in any case, we need to have this value as an accurate measurement. Do not include fresh or cull cows in the average, as they do not represent the real body condition of our cows. So based on this, we can describe the whole growth curve from the birth to the maturity. This is a graph that you can open in your NDS, and through this growth curve, you can evaluate phase by phase what should be the growth of our animals based on some target that we defined during their growth. Our heifers should be 40 to 42% of the mature body weight at puberty, 52 to 55% at breeding time, and the breeding time generally occurs after 3 or 4 estrus after the puberty. 83% of the mature body weight at first calving. We are here, basically, sorry. We are here. Then 92% at second calving, 96% at third calving, so that we can reach the maturity. If we properly set this kind of measurements, the target growth system is shown right here, and through this approach, we can have an idea about how our heifer should weight at this age. In our case, we are at 12 months of age. We are working with a breeding group, so we are moving from puberty to the breeding. And the breeding should happen a little earlier than 14 months, because we set the age at first calving at 23 months. Based on this, if we measure the weight of this group, I have to input the real weight here. In this case, we are around 795 pounds. And we can measure this or evaluate this through different, using different approaches. We can evaluate it as target growth rate. We can measure a sample of our heifers on a scale, or we can take some body measurements applying some specific equations that are available, but the final goal is to input the appropriate and the correct body weight for my group. Moving forward in our inputs, we ignore the days pregnant because we are working with a breeding group. Basically, we always input 3 as body condition score because we want to normalize our outcomes based on body condition score 3, the calf birth weight that is important when we work with pregnant heifers, and the average daily gain that in my example is not an input but is calculated, it is proposed by the target growth system. You can see that we are in this stage of the growth, I mean, from 5 months to the breeding. The goal is to reach 13.9 months, having close to 900 pounds. And in this case, based on the target growth system, this heifer should grow 2 pounds per day, while the system is calculating a lower value, just because my heifer, the weight of my heifers is little higher than expected. So in order to reach 900 pounds in the days in growth that are estimated by the system, it proposes a lower growth to reach the goal. Based on this approach, we are ready to evaluate our diet, and I jump to the diet screen just to show you the most important numbers that we are evaluating. And I know that Dave is gonna show you a couple of examples in the real North American conditions, just to discuss about some issues that we have when evaluates the heifer diet. So this is the diet we are feeding. This is the intake. You can see here some of the most important numbers that we edited in the animal input screen, and we can change here if we want. And now we need to evaluate the outcomes. The dry matter intake is close to the predicted, and that is fine. This is a real diet in our condition, just converted to the English system. Sorry, I need to plug in my computer, just a second. We have another way to evaluate if the dry matter intake that I am offering is expected to be eaten. And here we evaluate the intake based on NDF intake, and we know that the heifers have an NDF intake around 105% of their body weight. This is a good reason to have good measurements of the body weight of the group with a deviation, and based on this guideline, we can see that our NDF intake right now is around 1.1. So my expectation is that this group of breeding heifers are gonna eat this amount of dry matter intake. Then I can evaluate the outcomes. We have to remember that we are working with the 6.55 model, where the main modifications compared to the previous version is the adoption of a different forage passage rates, and this change also changed some of our target in terms of evaluation of the heifer diet. Probably Dave is gonna to discuss this issue in depth, but I give you just some preliminary information. So based on this new, relatively new model, we have to evaluate heifers, the growth, the predicted growth of our heifers based on ME. Because the prediction based on MP, it doesn't seem so accurate, and many times it overpredicts the real growth we observe for our group of heifers. Why this? There are probably many reasons that can explain this. One of the reasons is related to the passage rate adopted, because it is defined for adult cows, but it is not really validated for young animals. A second reason should be related to the microbial efficiency in the young animals, and this microbial efficiency looks like to overestimate the real microbial yield, so that we have an increase in terms of metabolizable protein supply from bacteria. Maybe there are also some aspects related to the requirement calculations, but based on these assumptions, our suggestion is to focus the attention on ME responses, and we have to accept that the responses for based on metabolizable protein many times are around 400 grams more than the expected gain based on ME. This is the value we need to target, and for growing heifers, we want to stay around 98 to 100% of the requirements. We pay attention when we supply more energy, because we do not want our heifers to get fat, but the goal is to stay around 100%. What about the protein side? Okay, we said our the current model overpredicts the metabolizable protein allowable gain, but we still need to focus on nitrogen supply in order to be sure that our microbial rumen microbes have enough nitrogen to build protein. We focus the attention on rumen ammonia, and we want to be sure that we are always in a positive balance for ammonia nitrogen. I mean, above 100%, better around 110, 115%. That is the reason why very often I add some urea in order to guarantee that my rumen ammonia requirements are met. And also I include some vegetable protein in order to be sure that soluble protein also provide some peptide, because we need that there is a requirement in peptides, not well measured by the model, but in reality we know that it is a requirement. Based on this, we can monitor other parameters of the diet. In this case, we have 16.5% of starch, 62% of forage, so no problem in terms of NDS. And in my experience, if we feed diet with these basic characteristics, we many times, when the management is good, many times we are able to reach the goal, and over the time we are able to anticipate year by year the age at first calving. This should be my introduction to the topic. So Dave, if you want to move forward showing some examples, I am available to discuss with you in case you need some interaction.
Okay, well, stay close to your button because you can sure help me. But what I want to do is go through some examples. And when we sat years ago in discussions with using the model for calves back in 6.5, we're using 6.55. That's the current system used. When we were using 6.5 and we were able to look at performance of heifers with diets, we were keying on the protein as the key metric for the growth of the animal. With 6.55, as Hermano said, I think the energy prediction is spot on. And then as the protein has got a little bit of a factor that we as nutritionists need to read the animals and look at, I just want to share a couple things with you. The ability to look at some of this. So this was again, this is the guy that has taken on the challenge of feeding the heifers as well as he can. We are measuring individual weights at birth. Again, this is supposedly a 6,000 cow dairy, but they keep marching them up every time. I think he was at 62 something the other day, so overcrowding to the max. But so we have an individual birth weight. The average is 90 pounds, which is quite different from the other dairy. We weigh individual calves at 60 days when they come out of the huts. They're in that group period for 14 days. And then they're group weighed again at 140, group weighed at pre-breeding, and then that, or pre-breeding, yes, and then pre-calving 45 days prior, they're group weighed at 1,400 pounds. And so our average on that system is 2 point some odd pounds. But again, this is calving at 21 months of age. And so, you know, looking down through there, you can see I'm not comfortable being that young. I'm really pushing. We've moved our voluntary waiting period up 2 weeks. The manager and I would love to get this another 2 weeks moved. But we have the kind of data looking at this system where we can look at different growth periods, and we know the intakes from Feed Watch, and you know, he's measuring enough pins that we can come up with data. Another scenario is Kansas is blessed with a bunch of moderate weather, some cheaper feed. So this is my commercial that you guys ought to send your heifers to Kansas to be raised in these big exercise lots. We have the proper feed. Sometimes trying to feed heifers, if you're trying to feed dairy quality feed to heifers, you have too good a feed for a heifer. We're able to put them out in these big dry lots. This is one of the better feed yards where we've worked. What they do is they weigh individual animals when they come in at 300 pounds. They do some vaccination 21 days later. So we have that. Again, individual measurements at 21 days. Around 5 months, we're still a calfhood vaccination on most of these animals going back to those states. So we have an individual weight again at 5 months. Then at pre-breeding, which is 12 to 13 months in some of these cattle and 13 to 14 in some of the other groups, depending on who owns the animals within the feed yard. So we get some incredible information at 300 pounds, 21 days later, 5 months, and then pre-breeding. If we have any question or they're going to run a pen of cattle through for any reason, a lot of it is not done in lockups. A lot of it's done through the chute facility right over in here. So they'll do check weights, and they'll have some check weights for me on groups of animals where they were required to do something different for an individual owner. And then we have group weights of what we call our go homes, which is somewhere between 45 and 60 days. What's interesting is that the idea is we can come up with these animals. So here's our 375 ration. We know what our target intake is, and we know what our actual fed is. The 450 diet we know, the 600-pound diet, the AI diet we do, and then we have 2 groups of pregnant animals that we're also feeding here. We have a dry matter intake for the period or the week, and we have a target group. So this was back in November. We were having some extremely warm weather for November. The conditions in the pens were great. Intakes on the big cattle were down a little bit. This is the incoming grain mix right here. So within any 2-week period from visit to visit, they have measured some of these. And so I can go back and calculate I can go back and get the average daily gain for those groups. And they may have measured 5 groups, or they may have measured 2 groups. Down here in the young cattle, we spend a lot of time rebacking and incoming and then calf hooding. So we've got a lot of data for this group in here. And so what's really fun to know is the predictions of the average daily gain And then one thing we do is we had to keep educating our feed yard guys and some of our dairy producers that we don't limit feed anything, we target feed them. So in these bigger facilities, we're able to say it's okay for those heifers to be out from 5 to 6 hours a day without feed in front of them. We want them all coming up to eat. We don't want them chasing every pickup that drives by, but they're okay because we have targeted the amount of intake to gain that 1.8 or 2 pounds of daily gain a day. So we're able to collect some of the data from some of those farms, and that's what's fun, is going back to the model. And what I did, part of the issue with using this on smaller groups, I was doing some quick comparison. So the feed yard that we showed the example of, they have 7 diets going from 8 diets, I guess, 7 incoming, and then they march all the way up to a short pregnant and a long pregnant diet. So they've got 12,000 head at that facility. They're keying in on dry matter that intensely. So we have 7 different diets. Where we have, guys that are maybe limited in facilities, we may only have 3 different diets, which is an example of what we have here. So it's not uncommon for a producer like this to have a diet that may span quite a few categories of weights of animals. And the hardest thing for the model to do is to predict this weight gain across a large group of animals unless you look closely at what the predicted dry matter intake is if you don't know it, and match that up for the weight of your animal. And so here you can see we have our weights in here. The refusal is the high cow refusal. Again, we created that feed as an ingredient from the TMR of that group of animals. Then we went back, and after having measured enough of those wet chems for crude protein, NDF, and starch, I have a very comfortable feeling that the starch is usually going to be 1/3 of what's fed in the TMR in my flake cow rations, where we use flake corn silage. So that refusal is adjusted, and it's an ingredient. It's not a mix here. And so, of course, that's at $0 back to the heifer. We've already paid for it. But the prediction here is about as tight as we can get on 325, 400-pound animals. Again, we can look here, and it's a 16% crude protein, starch of 18, but our predictions are 1.9, 1.63. As we work our way up to pregnant animals, let me jump to the next group. This would be the 300 to 400. This would be good wean from 400 to out of the AI pen. And so what happens is we start looking at, again, the energy at 2, and now the protein, as Hermano talked about, that is, most of the time we're running somewhere between 5 and up to 18% over requirement to get numbers that I'm comfortable with, so that our ME and MP ratio will fall into a good range. I can expect these animals to grow at 2. They will not grow at 2.1. I think as we get to bigger animals, we'll go up to the pregnant heifers here. These animals, again, we're at 945. We've got them 180 days pregnant, and our gains are at 2, and we're hitting that target feed at 21.5 pounds. These animals will not gain 2.65, and there's that probably more like 11% over, but I really have a hard time feeding pregnant heifers much less than a 13.9 or a 14% crude protein diet. I've looked at herds that have done that, or groups of animals, and they may be gaining okay, but they don't look very thrifty. There's some rough hair coats. Really kind of worried about frame growth on those. It's not about average daily gain. I think the beef industry looking at animals, even in the Angus breed, growing in frame scores. And so we've got a little work to do to catch up with even them on the dairy. But the idea is to dial in your animal. Again, here's the animal that I've described. And what you can do is always go to charts down here to look at a growth curve of this animal. Now, my animal here is needing to catch up a little bit across what I've stated for that group. And so I might need to investigate to see if my age is right, my body weight. But again, this animal is going to want to gain a little more than if she was laying right in here. So looking at how the model works, I think the frustration is if we have smaller groups, a wider range of animals within that group, if we were doing a diet from 350 to 800, we can also look at another function in here. If we had a wider group, we can go to animal inputs, and we can use the inputted, the period in, period out. So if my period in was coming in at 400 pounds or 375 even after weaning, and I was going to get the animals out of here at 900, then what the program will do is it will assign this as an average for this range of animals. And so then what happens is any variance off of that can cause me problems. But using it, what I need to do is come in here, and it looks like I would get a 2.3 average daily gain, 2.1, but the target really for that group of animals is 16 and a half. And if I move that closer to 16, I would get realistic numbers coming out of NDS and out of CNCPS. So when we're using this for heifers, it really is critical to, if you don't know the dry matter intake, to match that up to predicted. We did talk about this last Thursday, but the animal inputs is huge, and this is something that, as dairies get bigger, there's more groups of heifers to feed, and the smaller or the less intense management style, you may have to take some averages and look at those averages across that heifer program. So with that said, I think just looking at a couple examples, and again, looking at the system, the way it works, realizing that, let me just put this at 16.5. And again, we're at 100% of where we are, knowing that, we may have management issues we may have to work through with our heifer program. So that being said, I think what we'd like to do is just jump over to a couple other features. Hermano, do you want to look at, do you want to go through the dry cow?
Just to show the animal inputs sections for far off and close up, maybe.
Okay, I'll make you presenter, and then you can do that, and then I can show some examples after that.
Exactly like we said for heifers, the starting point to consider is
Hey,
the
boss. Hey, boss.
A.
One request. Could you move that to that other funny method of measuring things? Thank you.
Sorry,
I know that's not the correct way to do things, but
yeah.
it helps us. Thank you.
I was hoping that anyone noticed this, but I was wrong. So, okay. Sorry, guys. The animal input and the animal characterization is something really important, even for dry cow, regardless if we are talking about far off or close up, with some small but real important differences. So even in this case, we define the information making able the system to define the target growth system, calving interval, age at first calving, current age, are all data that are available on farm. Current body weight, please consider that the current body weight should be without conceptus. So if you weight this animal on a scale, you should make the system aware that the body weight is measured on a scale, because if you do not do that, the risk is that the system takes into a double account the conceptus weight. So the measurement of the body weight should be considered before to input this value. We already discussed about the mature body weight. Everything we said for heifers, talking about mature body weight, is true even for dry cows. So the same measurement we did for heifers is valid also for heifers, for dry cows, sorry. We are talking about, in this case, far off. So it is really important to input the average days pregnant for far off cows, because in this way the system considers the requirements for conceptus, and in the last part of the pregnancy, these requirements start to be very, very significant. The body condition score should be the body condition score that we measure at the end of the lactation, and our goal is do not have any change in terms of body conditions. So in this case, it doesn't matter to have a target body conditions or expected body condition score, because the two values should be the same. Calf birth weight, if we do a good job with calf, and if we weight the calf at birth, that would be great. And in this case, we should input the real weight we observe. And in the far off, we also consider the average daily gain based on the target growth system. And this average daily gain is something in addition to the gain generated by conceptus, and it happens when our cows didn't reach the maturity. So in this case, we are at third lactation. So we still have some growth in order to reach the maturity, and during the far off, we consider this additional requirement. If we discuss instead of the close-up, many things are the same, and many of the consideration that we did before are true even for close-up, with two main changes or two main considerations that I would like to talk about. First, we need to set days pregnant in the last 21 days of pregnancy in order to make the system aware that we are working with a close-up group. You can see if I work with 245, the system do not recognize that we are in reality working with a close-up, while if you put, for example, 270, we are in the last 3 weeks of pregnancy, of gestation, and the system recognizes that we are working in close-up. This is not just a matter of label, but if we are in close-up, the system also considers the mammogenesis. And the mammogenesis is something that we have to consider in order to have the proper metabolizable protein supply based on the conceptus, based on fetus requirements, but also based on the other tissues that started to grow again in order to prepare this organ to the new lactation. The second consideration I mentioned is that during the close-up, we do not want to consider the target growth. In other words, even though in theory these cows should have some additional requirements in order to reach the maturity, in practice, we think that during the close-up, the cows have other priorities other than to finalize their maturity. So if we add this average daily gain, the risk is to consider some requirements that in reality should be included in the fetus and mammogenesis requirements. So our suggestion is to uncheck target growth and to zero out the average daily gain. In this way, the priorities for this cow will be to complete the growth, to finalize the growth of the fetus, and to have enough energy and mainly protein resources for the udder. In this way, For these cows, we have to pay attention to the dry matter intake, because we know very well that during the last 2-3 weeks of gestation, we have a reduction of the dry matter intake. So we should evaluate the real dry matter intake in order to be sure that all the requirements are met. Just few words again for what concerns the metabolizable protein. We know that there are different philosophies in terms of metabolizable protein supply. And what I mean is that in our perspective, if during the far off we should meet the requirements, and we should stay around 1,000 or little more grams of metabolizable protein, because we do not have extra requirements based on other growth. This is different during the close-up, because during the close-up, the minimum supply suggested for metabolizable protein should be around 1,300 grams minimum, but in practice, we would like to stay close to 1,400 grams in order to consider that within the group, we have a variability in terms of intake, and if we provide the minimum amount of metabolizable protein, maybe 1,200, 1,300, we have the possibility that within the group, some cows eat less, so that they will eat a less amount of metabolizable protein. So in this stage, it is really it is critical to monitor the supply of metabolizable protein, even considering the variability of the intake within the close-up group. Someone is suggesting to maintain high level of metabolizable protein, let's say around 1,300, 1,400 grams through all the dry period, but I don't think this is supported by real data. It is not supported by any, for what I know, any strong research. So I would like to stay on the current suggestion based on guidelines provided by Cornell and some other groups in order to supply a minimum amount of metabolizable protein for far off that should be around 1,000 grams, paying great attention to the close-up, considering also the variability of the intake within the group. This is what we are doing for the dry period, far off and close up, and maybe Dave can show you some of real example in your conditions. In any case, I am here, Dave, in case you want to discuss some items.
Okay, thanks for the overview. I'm going to just show a couple diets, and then we'll get to our break as soon as we can. Again, Kurt, you can let me know if there's questions coming in that we need to answer. But I want to just start out with a dry cow diet. And this, okay. So this is a demo cow diet, basically kind of looked at some dry cow diets that are on dairies, and we put this together. Again, measuring, somewhere around 28, 25, 28.5 dry matter intake. I think I got some sheets from this farm, or, the demo that this is copied after. And over the winter, they may be a pound or even 2 pounds higher in dry matter intake. We'll go through, again, these are target fed. They're not as ad libitum fed, but you can see we've got, some dried forages in here, some cheap protein, again, some more refusal going through there. And again, this is set up for 255 days pregnant, 335 body condition score. It's static. This is a rather mature herd with the size of the animals. And again, looking at the amount of intake, probably a little lower in crude protein than I feel comfortable, about 12.8 or 13. Starts about 12. Most of these are around 12 to 15, but again, just a very simple, simplistic diet. Again, the 255 is a dry cow at rest. As soon as she is targeted in at 21 days pre-calving, she has a requirement for mammogenesis to build her udder. And again, it usually takes about 3 megacals of energy and about 400 grams of protein to do that. And that is a flat requirement that comes in at 21 days. Hermano said something on Thursday. Usually when he and I are doing these in front of groups in North and South America, I usually bring prizes for answers. The real question is now on most U.S. dairies, and again, I challenge you guys to go into your PC Dart Dairy Comp. Dairy Comp, if you type in some days carried calf space, or some space days carried calf space past days carried calf, and then look at it for lactation 1 and then lactation greater than 1. Most herds are not, if they're using a lot of calving sires, they're not gestation at 283 like we used to be taught in school. A lot of them are 278 or 275, which means you have to move those things in the close-up pin a little earlier. But right here you can see we have put a diet in that would be representation of a close-up cow diet. And you can see again, just from the small synopsis, that it's 265. It says close-up here. And again, right down here, we have our mammogenesis area right here. So what I'd love to do is just change this to 255. And we lose the close-up denotation right here, classification. And if we go down, now we have 0 for lactation, 0 megacals, and 0 metabolizable protein. If we go back up there and make that a close-up cow, now we have growth in mammogenesis. Sorry, put it down here at 276 and 248. Again, changing that back. And there's where we get 0 for growth and just a small amount for MP. Again, we have these animals. If we go in and look at animal inputs, you can see that I've got a rather mature animal here. mature weight 1650, she's at 1550. If I go to the charts here and I look at this animal, the targeted growth, or the optimal growth method, basically has them growing, but post-calving and pre-calving, I'm not sure we're getting this. We're probably getting a bigger jump up in here to compensate for that. But again, if we look at animal type, I just have a problem putting it at 000, so it's some small amount. There's my calf weight. Again, we are here and here as far as body condition, days carried calf, information above here. Clicking this on will auto fill this for the growth. But again, we click it off and go ahead and now in this close-up animal, the other thing that kicks in when we go from close-up, if I go down to other items here, you can see that I'm running a minus DCAD, and to be politically correct, I went and grabbed 3 products from 3 friends and stuck that in there so I didn't have to worry about what I was feeding. So I've got a minus 11 here. And in reality, if this is a far off dry cow, I probably wouldn't be doing that. But if once I click her into close up, this will give me basically a calculation from the 4-element equation. I think this is Jesse Gulp's version 1 and version 2, giving me those values. But it also shows the published information from Ian Lane on what he called his milk fever predictor. So we'll actually predict what the urine pH is, the hypocalcemia, what the plasma, what the total plasma, ionized plasma, gives us some NEPA and also some potassium magnesium ratio. Just some information that clicks in once she becomes 21 days pre-calving. That information is there. Again, looking at where we are, usually I try to set these at about 100%, and then I watch body condition at the dairies religiously in this group of animals. A lot of these dairies are outside dry lots, inside freestall barns, so we might tend to give them a little extra even through the winter, just to put up with some weather events that I can't model. So all that being said, in these close-up cows, again, we'll talk about this, probably hit on it tomorrow afternoon, but this starch level at 19.8, dry cows maybe at 12 or 15% starch, and we'll go over a way to look at your herd and how we transition cows across a dairy. But this is just a quick example of the dry cow close-up cows. I probably am a little heavier than Hermano on my MPs, and looking at and I do look at those across the dairy also. But anyway, Kurt, anything that we need to address that I jumped over?
Yeah, we can. One is SWG, clarification on that.
I'm not a real scientific guy, so Hermano had to keep explaining that to me. That's shrunk weight gain.
Shrunk weight gain.
The shrunk weight gain is the value used by the model to run the calculations, and it is related to average daily gain, multiplying this value times 0.95. I mean 0.96. Basically, the rank weight gain is 96% of the average daily gain. It's just a conversion to make the model able to run some calculations.
Okay. And then some thoughts on balancing amino acids for dry cows, especially close up. Any?
What we know is that there is an increasing interest in feeding amino acids during the close-up dry cows, basically there are some guidelines. I am not so sure they are so robust, but overall we should supply at least 30 grams of metabolizable protein, metabolizable methionine or absorbed methionine, and 90 grams of metabolizable lysine to guarantee the proper amino acid balancing during the close-up. There are many studies done recently showing some benefits in supplying methionine and even lysine during this period, during the close-up. Quite honestly, I do not have a direct experience because my farmer are quite reluctant to increase some costs without the proper understanding of the benefit. But again, it should be a promising way to improve performance and health of the fresh cow.
So I think what we see a lot in the States, and approaching this as a veterinarian, years ago, a lot of the cows, a lot of dairymen don't mind in spending. I sound like a government official if I say investing some money into this group of animals if they can prevent issues. So I think I see about half the herds that I see that people show me diets with are using, the 30 and 90 gram level here and here. And again, I think the opinion is they see a good response. I'm not sure that we can quantify that, but
And that response is as a fresh cow. Sometimes people wonder about for colostrum quantity and quality as well.
great point.
Yes, but in this case, it should be enough to guarantee the right level of metabolizable protein. I mean, maybe we can have some advantages even on colostrum, but we do not have data that demonstrates that the addition of rumen-protected amino acids to reach the level I suggested, in reality, provide some further advantage other than the proper level of metabolizable protein.
And any thoughts on a one-group TMR from far to close?
Dave, do you have experience?
I know there in large herds and small herds, it is a viable management option.
Exactly. It's much more an issue of management than nutrition, I think.
And I know Kurt and you and I have talked about it. I am not.
Yeah.
I'm not a large fan of it, just because of some of the responses and looking at herds, analyzing herds that have gone and done that over a period of time. Just not sure that we get the same response that we do on a 2-group.
Yeah, I would agree. It takes unique management skills to get through the metabolic differences between those 2 groups of animals.
And I can't remember, we did on our YouTube channel is our session we did with Dr. Heather Dan.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember her take-home message on that, but I think she was addressed in the same.
I have a consideration about one group of dry cow. If cow responses are good, everything is good. But when some health issues appears during this period, I have no idea how to minimize these issues with one group dry cow. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because if we do not prepare in an appropriate way my cows to calving, feeding a specific diet in the last 3 weeks of gestation, I have no idea how to remove those possible health issues just working with one group dry cow. Again, maybe everything is fine. Okay, I can continue to support the one group dry cow, hoping that everything will go fine in the future. Otherwise, the farmer need to consider to split these cows into 2 groups.
Yeah. And if
It's just a personal consideration, not supported by any data. But every time we work with one group dry cow with health issues, it is a real challenge to remove these issues without changing the management and the barn layout. Other questions?
The last one looks like thoughts on amino acids for growing heifers.
I sure wish we knew where we were, trying to look at some hog data and stuff, but I sure don't know where we are now. I know it's a good topic for calf starters, but right now, the feed yards that are doing all growing heifers, and again, please send your heifers to our state so we can grow them for you. But I know that's not even a possibility with, it's all protein price, looking at MP to ME ratios. It would be interesting to have that data, but I'm not sure where it's at. Armando, do you?
No, I do not have any experience, and in my opinion, it would be great to start to discuss about amino acid nutrition in calf. I don't know if we are ready to make the same with heifers.
There is one elephant in the room that I would like to talk about before we get off of this, and I want to be careful of our time, but I left it up on the screen here. I'm still showing my screen, and it's this thing right here. So if I get emails about this, I have to take a deep breath and then answer the email. But so the original diets that I think University of Illinois did and everything, they were trying to, look at dry forages and trying to control energy in diets. And so they came up with, straw, and that's where Goldilocks was born. And it could be from maybe one of the guys on here or another veterinarian that floated around the United States. But the whole idea of straw diluting out, quote, energy. But the NEL calculations are, Kurt, when was that developed, the NEL equation? We're looking at ancient history.
Yeah, metabolism trials with ADF.
And so, you're talking about when you were a teenager. And then the whole idea of balancing dry cow diets or transition cow diets on NELs. We'll show some examples about people trying to chase energy in one of our sessions tomorrow, looking at a quick thing about reports across animals. And I could preface it a little bit, but looking at where, we don't move animals up on energy, they move up on intake. Our diets basically have components the animal sees, amino acid, glucose, from the starch and BFA. So looking at NELs, but I know people need to get comfortable with that. But the NRC and the model will come up with two different NELs, and those may not be close to what you're used to looking at. But here we give you those so that you can see and get comfortable with it. I think there's other things we ought to be looking at, metabolizable energy, starch in these diets as we move them up. So I just wanted to touch base on that. Nobody asked a question, but it is something we hear a lot about or get questions about. Go ahead.
Did you want to? Yeah, one brief question at the end here. It's kind of curious, debating whether you feed a close-up. If you have a one-group TMR, should that diet be closer to the close-up diet or the far-off diet? And if it's the close-up diet, should we only feed it on a limit-fed type situation? I would say that whatever we do, don't limit feed. Make sure all those animals get feed, because that's the worst thing to do is have them run out. Intake.
I've worked with, a couple of different guys, and, that's always the struggle. So if you're going to do a one group dry cow, you better have some sort of a fresh pen, even if it's, 5 pounds of dry hay and lactation TMR, at least for 2 weeks or something. We have to acclimate cows, moving across different rations on a dairy. I think that's something that we don't do as very good as dairy nutritionists. If you look at a feed yard, they may have 5 different diets that cattle are on, from receiving to finishing, and yet we jump around on diets without looking at how we transition them across rations. But yeah, they're kind of a hybrid of, and I have friends that do a lot of them, and they're kind of a hybrid of each. Make them anionic and kind of put the starch in the middle, or the NEL, quote unquote, whatever they're trying to look at. And they're kind of a hybrid of both, but most of them are anionic, to the -7, -5 across groups.